10,000 companies just did something that could force the United States government to hand back $150 billion. Not someday, in the next few weeks. The Supreme Court is about to rule on the biggest refund case in American history. And here's what nobody's telling you. Whether you know it or not, you already paid for this. Your grocery bill, your iPhone, your car. Everything cost more because of tariffs that might have been illegal the entire time. And if the Supreme Court says what legal experts think they're about to say, the financial chaos that follows will hit your wallet faster than you can say tax refund. Look, I need you to understand something right now. This isn't about boring tax policy or legal technicalities. This is about $150 billion that companies paid to the government under law that 2 federal courts already said was misused. And small businesses are so desperate to get their money back that they're selling their refund claims to hedge funds for 9 cents on the dollar. 9 cents. That's how bad this has gotten. Let me tell you about a company called Kids 2. They make baby toys, walkers, activity centers, the kind of stuff you see at Target. Small business, not Amazon, not Walmart, just a regular American company trying to survive. Between February 2025 and today, Kids 2 paid millions in Trump tariffs on toys imported from China. Reciprocal tariffs, they were called. 10%, 20%, sometimes 50% on top of regular import duties. The company paid every dollar the government demanded. They didn't have a choice. You can't import goods into America without paying what customs says you owe. But here's the thing. Kids 2 doesn't think those tariffs were legal. And they're not alone. Over 1,000 companies filed lawsuits saying Trump used the wrong law. Discover more transcript editing tools. YouTube Transcript API video transcription service. SEO optimization tools. YouTube video transcripts. AI prompt libraries. Vitamin content creation courses. Note-taking apps. Translation API access. To impose these tariffs. That he exceeded his authority. That the tariffs need to be refunded. So Kids 2 is waiting for their day in court, right? Waiting for the Supreme Court to rule. Waiting to get their money back. Except they can't wait because waiting means their cash is tied up for months, maybe years. And small businesses run on cash flow. Payroll doesn't wait for Supreme Court rulings. Rent doesn't wait. Suppliers don't wait. So, you know what Kids 2 did? They sold their refund claim to a hedge fund. For 23 cents on the dollar, think about that. The company paid, let's say, $1 million in tariffs. They have a legitimate legal claim to get that million back. But instead of waiting for the government to process the refund, they lost $770,000 just to get some cash now instead of waiting years for maybe getting it all back. And that's not even the worst deal. Some companies are selling refund claims for 9 cents on the dollar. 9 cents. Losing 91% of their money because they don't believe the government will ever actually pay them back or they can't afford to wait. And here's what should make you angry. Those hedge funds buying the claims, they're betting the Supreme Court rules against Trump. They're betting the government has to refund all $150 billion. So they buy claims from desperate small businesses for pennies, then collect full value when the refunds come through. The small business gets crushed, the hedge fund makes a fortune, and the government's legal mess created the whole situation. This is happening right now, today, while the Supreme Court sits on the decision. And it's about to get so much worse. Here's what they're not telling you. The Supreme Court is on recess right now, 4 weeks. They won't even be back until February 20th. But there's a deadline, February 6th, 2026, next week. Companies have to register for electronic refunds by that date, or they can't get their money back electronically. The window is closing while the court isn't even in session. You see the problem? Okay, let me back up and explain how America ended up in a situation where the government might have to refund $150 billion. February 2025, President Trump imposes what he calls reciprocal tariffs. The idea is simple. If China charges Americans 25% tariffs on imports, America should charge China 25% back. Reciprocal. Fair trade. Sounds reasonable, right? Except here's the problem. The president doesn't normally have the power to just impose tariffs whenever he wants. Congress controls trade policy. It's literally in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8. Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. But over the decades, Congress has given presidents limited authority to impose tariffs in specific situations. National security threats under Section 232, unfair trade practices under Section 301, that kind of thing. Trump didn't use those authorities for the reciprocal tariffs. Instead, he used something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, EA, passed in 1977. Now, EPA is a powerful law. It lets the president impose economic sanctions during national emergencies, freeze assets, block transactions, cut off financial access. Every president since 1977 has used IEA for sanctions. Iran, Russia, North Korea, terrorist organizations. But here's what no president had ever done before Trump. Use IA to impose tariffs. Not once in 47 years. Because IPA wasn't designed for tariffs, it was designed for sanctions, for emergencies, for immediate threats to national security. Trump declared that trade deficits with China and other countries constituted a national emergency, an unusual and extraordinary threat to American national security and foreign policy. Those are the legal words you need to trigger EPA. And based on that declaration, he imposed tariffs, 10%, 20%, 50% on imports from almost every country America trades with. The tariffs started February 4th, 2025, and the money started pouring in. Importers had no choice. You want to bring goods into America, you pay the tariff. Customs collects it at the border. By December 14th, 2025, Customs had collected $133.5 billion from these reciprocal tariffs alone. That's from February to mid-December, 10 months, tanning $13 billion per month on average. Keep that rate going through January 2026, and you're at $150 billion total. That's where the number comes from. $150 billion collected under tariffs that might be illegal. Now, companies didn't just pay quietly. Within weeks of the tariffs starting, lawsuits started filing. Costco sued, the office supply chain. They import goods from all over the world. Revlon sued, the cosmetics company. Bumblebee Tuna sued, Kawasaki sued, Yokohama Tire sued. All of them made the same argument. IEPA doesn't authorize tariffs. Trade deficits aren't national emergencies. The president exceeded his constitutional authority. And here's the thing. They started winning. May 28th, 2025, the Court of International Trade, the specialized federal court that handles trade disputes, ruled unanimously that Trump's use of AIPA for tariffs was illegal, not just questionable, illegal. The statute doesn't grant that authority. Trump's lawyers appealed. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit heard the case. They upheld the lower court ruling illegal. So Trump appealed to the Supreme Court. And on November 5th, 2025, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments. This is where it gets interesting because during those arguments, justices from both the conservative and liberal sides expressed serious skepticism about Trump's legal theory. Justice Kavanaugh, a Trump appointee, asked pointed questions about whether I's text actually authorizes tariffs. Justice Barrett, another Trump appointee, questioned whether trade deficits meet the definition of national emergency under the statute. Legal experts listening to the arguments said it sounded like Trump was going to lose. Not guaranteed, but likely. And if Trump loses at the Supreme Court, every dollar collected under these tariffs has to be refunded. $150 billion. Back to the companies who paid. That's the biggest refund operation in United States Customs and Border Protection history by far. Nothing even close. And it has to happen while companies are fighting deadlines, while small businesses are selling claims to hedge funds, while the government insists refunds would be, quote, almost impossible to process. And here's what should terrify you. The government doesn't want to give this money back. They've already spent it. Trump promised tariff revenue would fund $2,000 checks to every American. Military expansion, debt reduction, farmer bailouts. The money's allocated. It's gone. And if the Supreme Court orders refunds, the government has to find $150 billion they don't have. You see the crisis coming? Let me explain why this refund situation is an administrative nightmare that's never been dealt with at this scale. First, the numbers. 1,000 companies have filed lawsuits. But it's not just 1,000 refund checks. Each company imports thousands of shipments. Each shipment is a separate customs entry. Each entry itemizes the tariffs paid. Costco alone probably has tens of thousands of entries subject to these tariffs. Multiply that across 10,000 companies. And you're talking about hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of individual transactions that have to be reviewed, recalculated, and refunded. Normally, customs refunds are rare. Maybe a company overpaid. Maybe there was a clerical error. Maybe a free trade agreement applies retroactively. You file a protest. Customs reviews it. They issue a refund. Takes weeks, maybe months. No big deal. But this is a tariff paid by every company over 11 months. All at once, all disputed, all requiring court-ordered recalculation. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency has never handled anything remotely close to this scale. Not in 200 years of existence. And there are deadlines, strict deadlines that companies are racing against right now. When goods clear customs, there's a process called liquidation. That's when customs finalizes the duties owed and the entry becomes final. You have 314 days from the date of entry for liquidation to happen. After liquidation, you have 180 days to file a protest. If you miss that window, your ability to get a refund disappears. Gone. It doesn't matter if the tariff was illegal. It doesn't matter if the Supreme Court says you're owed money. If you didn't file a protest within 180 days of liquidation, you're out of luck. For goods that entered in February 2025, the liquidation window already closed. If companies didn't file protective protests, they can't get refunds on those entries. The money is gone forever. This is why you see companies filing lawsuits even if they're not sure they'll win. It's called a protective suit. You file to preserve your rights, because if you wait and the Supreme Court rules in your favor, but you miss the deadline, you get nothing. Now, the government knows this is a mess. So Customs and Border Protection just announced January 2025 a new electronic refund system. Starting February 6th, 2026, all refunds will be processed through AC, automated clearinghouse, electronic bank transfers, no more paper checks, everything electronic. The government says this will speed up processing and reduce fraud. But here's the catch. Companies have to register for the electronic system by February 6th. If you miss that deadline, you can't get electronic refunds. And since Customs won't be doing paper checks anymore, that means you can't get refunded at all until you register. February 6th is next week. The Supreme Court is on recess until February 20th. Companies are registering for refunds before they even know if refunds will be ordered. And trade lawyers are telling clients, register now, don't wait because the window is short. And if you miss it, you're stuck. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court hasn't issued the ruling. Could come February 20th, could come March, could come April. Nobody knows. And while companies wait, their money is tied up. Cash they paid in tariffs, cash they can't use to pay employees, buy inventory, expand operations. This is why small businesses are selling claims to hedge funds. They can't wait. They need cash now, even if it means taking a 90% loss. The CEO of Basic Fund, a toy company, told reporters he's, quote, skeptical they'll ever see the $6 million they paid in tariffs. The CEO of Danny, an appliance importer, said, quote, it's not in the government's DNA to give back money. These are business owners who deal with customs every day. They know how the system works, and they don't believe the refunds are coming even if the Supreme Court orders them. One trade lawyer called the situation a, quote, dog's breakfast. Legal mess, administrative chaos, political nightmare, and the clock is ticking on all of it. Now here's the part that's going to make you angry. While small businesses are desperate and selling claims for 9 cents on the dollar, hedge funds are making a fortune. They're buying up these claims, betting the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, then collecting full refunds. The small guy gets crushed, the Wall Street guy gets paid, and the government created the whole mess. Let's talk about what the Trump administration is actually saying about all this, because their position tells you a lot about what they think is going to happen. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, told reporters in January 2026 that he thinks it's, quote, very unlikely the Supreme Court will overturn the tariffs. He said the administration is confident in their legal position, that EPA clearly grants the authority that trade deficits absolutely constitute national emergencies. But then Bant said something interesting. He said if the court does strike down the tariffs, it would be a, quote, complete mess to issue refunds, that it would, quote, take years to figure out who to pay, that it's, quote, almost impossible for our country to process. Now, importers immediately pushed back on this. Trade lawyers said Bessent was exaggerating. One lawyer said, quote, it should be straightforward. Every customs entry itemizes the tariffs paid. The data exists. Customs knows exactly who paid what and when. It's not a mystery. It's in the computer systems. You match the entry number to the payment record, recalculate the duties without the EPA tariff, issue the difference as a refund, done. So why is Treasury saying it's impossible? 2 reasons. First, they don't want to do it. Refunding $150 billion means finding $150 billion in the budget to replace that revenue. The tariff money is already allocated, already promised to programs. If it has to be refunded, well, that's a budget hole. And Trump has said he'll just impose new tariffs under different legal authorities to replace the lost revenue. Section 232, Section 301, executive discretion, whatever it takes to keep the money flowing. But that takes time. New tariff investigations, new legal processes, months of work. And in the meantime, the budget has a $150 billion hole. Second, the administration is trying to send a message to the Supreme Court. If you overturn these tariffs, you'll create chaos, financial chaos, administrative chaos, political chaos. So maybe you should think twice. This is a legal strategy called threatening consequences. You tell the court that ruling against you will cause so much damage that they shouldn't do it, that they should find a way to uphold the law or at least minimize the harm. And there's actually a legal doctrine that might help Trump here. It's called prospective overruling or sunbursting. It's rare, but it exists. Here's how it works. The Supreme Court rules that the tariffs are illegal going forward. Future tariffs can't be imposed under EA, but past tariffs that were already collected, well, those don't get refunded. The ruling only applies prospectively to the future, not retroactively to the past. The legal theory is that retroactive application would cause exceptional societal disruption, would wreak havoc on government finances, would undermine settled expectations. It's a way for the court to say the law was misused, but avoid the chaos of massive refunds. This doctrine was used in a 1932 case, Great Northern Railway versus Sunburst Oil, hence the name sunbursting. but it's extremely rare. Most of the time, when the Supreme Court overturns a law, the ruling applies retroactively. People who were harmed get relief. But Trump's lawyers floated the sunburst option during oral arguments. They said, if the court strikes down the tariffs, please make it prospective only. Don't order refunds. The justices didn't commit, but they didn't reject it either. And if they go this route, companies lose. They paid illegal tariffs. The Supreme Court agrees the tariffs were illegal, but the government gets to keep the money anyway. That would be the ultimate insult. You were right. The tariffs were illegal, but you don't get your money back. Sorry. Legal experts think this is unlikely. Sunbursting is supposed to be reserved for truly exceptional situations where retroactivity would destroy the social fabric. Refunding tariffs to businesses doesn't rise to that level, but it's possible. And the fact that Treasury is talking about chaos and impossibility suggests they're setting up the argument. This is where it gets even crazier. The Supreme Court has another option nobody's talking about. They could split the baby, say some tariffs were legal and some weren't. Uphold tariffs on China, but strike down tariffs on allies. Partial refunds, partial victory, partial mess. And that might be the worst outcome of all, because then nobody knows what gets refunded and what doesn't. Okay, let's talk about what this actually means for your life. Because I know you're thinking, I didn't pay these tariffs. I'm not importing goods from China. Why should I care? Here's why. You paid for these tariffs, every single one of them. When Costco imports goods and pays a 20% tariff, they don't just eat that cost, they pass it on to you. The price you pay at the store includes the tariff. When Apple imports iPhones from China and pays tariffs on components, they build that into the retail price. Your iPhone costs more because of tariffs. When Ford imports auto parts and pays tariffs, your car costs more. When grocery stores import food products and pay tariffs, your groceries cost more. Tariffs aren't paid by foreign countries. That's the lie politicians tell. Tariffs are paid by importers, American companies, who pass the cost to consumers. American consumers. Studies have shown that the 2018 to 2019 Trump tariffs cost the average American household about $1,000 per year in higher prices. These 2025 reciprocal tariffs are bigger, broader, more expensive. Your cost of living went up because of tariffs that might have been illegal the entire time. Now, if the Supreme Court orders refunds, you might think, great, companies get their money back. Prices go down. Not how it works. When companies get refunds, their first priority is making themselves whole, recovering the profit margins they lost, paying down debt they took on to cover the tariff costs, restoring balance sheets, lowering prices for consumers. That's maybe fifth on the list. Supply chain experts have said that even if refunds happen, consumers won't see immediate price drops. It'll take time. Competition might eventually force prices down, but not overnight. So you paid higher prices for a year, and you might not get that money back, even if companies do. But it gets worse. Your job might be at risk. If you work in retail, your employer is dealing with this crisis. Inventory costs are up. Inventory costs. Margins are squeezed. If they have to wait years for refunds, cash flow problems mount. That means hiring freezes. That means layoffs. If you work in manufacturing, your company's supply chain is disrupted. Tariffs make imported components more expensive. If the company can't pass costs to customers, margins collapse, production gets cut, workers get furloughed. If you work in logistics, shipping, freight, customs brokerage, your entire industry is dealing with chaos, uncertainty about tariffs, uncertainty about refunds, companies delaying shipments. That means less business. Less business means job cuts. The ripple effects touch millions of jobs. Not immediately, but over months as the uncertainty and cash flow problems compound. And if you have investments, your portfolio is exposed. Retail stocks are vulnerable. Import-dependent companies are vulnerable. Banks that lent money to businesses based on projected cash flows that assumed no refunds are vulnerable. When the Supreme Court ruling comes down, the stock market will react fast. If the tariffs are struck down, companies with big refund claims see their stock jump. But the government's budget crisis spooks the broader market. Volatility spikes. If the tariffs are upheld, import-dependent companies get crushed. Their costs stay high. Their margin stays squeezed. Stock prices fall. Stock. Either way, your 401k takes a hit. And here's the thing that should make you furious. This entire crisis was avoidable. If Trump had used the normal tariff authorities, Section 232 or 301, companies might not like the tariffs, but at least they'd be legal. There wouldn't be refund lawsuits. There wouldn't be uncertainty. But he wanted to move fast. He wanted to use emergency powers. He wanted to bypass the normal process. And now we have a $150 billion mess that affects every American whether they know it or not. I'm posting updates on this case every single day to our WhatsApp channel. Economy meet history. The Supreme Court could rule any day now. When it drops, the financial implications hit immediately. Markets move, stocks react. You need to know before everyone else. Link in description. Join now because when this ruling comes, it comes fast. Let me show you the bigger picture here. Because this case isn't just about $150 billion. It's about presidential power. It's about whether one person can impose massive economic policies without congressional approval. The Constitution is pretty clear. Article 1, Section 8, Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. Congress, not the president. But over the 20th century, Congress passed laws giving presidents limited trade authority in specific situations. The idea was that the president needs some flexibility to respond to emergencies or unfair trade practices quickly. Trade Act of 1974. Section 301, authority to respond to unfair trade. Fine. Trade Expansion Act of 1962. Section 232, authority to impose tariffs for national security. Okay. International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, EA. Authority to impose sanctions during national emergencies. Sure. But here's what wasn't contemplated. A president using IEEPA, an emergency sanctions law, to impose permanent trade tariffs on allies during peacetime based on the theory that trade deficits are national emergencies. That's not what Congress intended when they passed IEDA. Everyone agrees on that. The question is whether the text of the statute accidentally grants that authority anyway. Trump's lawyers say yes. The statute says the president can regulate imports during a national emergency. Tariffs regulate imports. Trade deficits are emergencies. Therefore, tariffs are authorized. But two lower courts said no. IPA's history, context, and structure show it was meant for sanctions, freezing assets, blocking financial transactions, not imposing tariffs, which have their own separate legal framework under trade law. If the Supreme Court sides with Trump, they're giving future presidents enormous power. Any president could declare any economic situation a national emergency and impose tariffs. Trade deficits, currency manipulation, labor standards, environmental policies, climate change. Declare it an emergency. Impose tariffs. Bypass Congress completely. That's a fundamental shift in how American government works. Trade policy, which has been congressional authority for 250 years, becomes presidential authority. I mean, it doesn't stop at trade, i.e., EPA is broad. National emergencies, threatening national security and foreign policy. That could justify almost anything. Future presidents could use EA for domestic policy. Declare immigration an emergency. Use EA to block remittances to other countries. Declare healthcare costs an emergency. Use EPA to regulate pharmaceutical imports. The precedent this case sets goes way beyond tariffs. On the flip side, if the Supreme Court strikes down Trump's use of IEPA, they're putting constraints on presidential emergency powers that have been expanding for decades. That might be good for constitutional structure, restore checks and balances, reinforce congressional authority, but it also limits the president's ability to respond to real emergencies. What if China does something genuinely threatening? What if there's a situation where tariffs are the right tool and Congress won't act fast enough? Tying the president's hands completely might create its own problems. This is why constitutional law professors are watching this case so closely. It's not about the money, it's about the structure of a government. And the Supreme Court knows this. You could hear it in oral arguments. Justices asking about hypotheticals. What if this? What if that? Trying to figure out where the line is. Because wherever they draw that line, it affects every president from now on. This case will be cited for the next 100 years. Every time a president tries to use emergency powers for economic policy, lawyers will point to this case. If Trump wins, they'll say emergency powers are broad. The president has authority. If Trump loses, they'll say emergency powers are narrow. Congress controls trade. Either way, the ruling reshapes the presidency. And here's what absolutely nobody in Washington wants you to understand. If the Supreme Court strikes these tariffs down, Congress is going to have to reform. EPA. They're going to have to clarify what national emergency actually means. And when they do that, they'll expose how many other emergency declarations are legally questionable. This opens Pandora's box. Let me walk you through what happens in the hours and days after the Supreme Court releases this decision. Because it's going to move fast, and if you're not prepared, you'll miss it. Supreme Court opinions usually drop on opinion days, typically Mondays, but sometimes other days. They release at 10 a.m. Eastern. No advance notice, no warning, just boom, opinion posted. The second it posts, algorithms start reading it. High-frequency trading firms have systems that scan the text instantly, looking for keywords. Tariffs upheld, tariffs struck down, partial ruling. Within milliseconds, trades execute based on what the algorithms find. If tariffs are struck down, stocks of companies with big refund claims jump. Costco pops, other retailers pop, the algorithms buy. But at the same time, treasury bonds sell off. Because $150 billion in refunds means $150 billion in new government borrowing. More supply of treasury bonds. Prices fall, yields rise. Within seconds, the stock market swings. Billions in value change hands before human beings even finish reading the opinion. Then the news alerts go out. Bloomberg, Reuters, CNBC. Breaking news. Supreme Court rules on Trump tariffs. But even these are minutes behind the algorithms. Lawyers read the full opinion. They look for nuances. Full refunds are partial, perspective only. How broad is the ruling? They call clients, start planning next steps. Companies' legal teams scramble. If refunds are ordered, they have to file claims fast. The 180-day protest window starts ticking from the date of the ruling or from liquidation, depending on how the court structures relief. Trade lawyers' phones explode, everyone calling at once. What does this mean for my case? Can I get a refund? How do I file? Customs and Border Protection goes into crisis mode. They have to process potentially hundreds of thousands of refund claims. The new electronic system better work because it's about to get flooded. The political reaction starts. If Trump loses, he goes on Truth Social, calls the decision a disgrace, political decision, maybe threatens to pack the court or ignore the ruling. Congressional Republicans have to decide whether to defend Trump or distance themselves. Do they criticize the court? Do they propose legislation to restore tariff authority? Congressional Democrats celebrate vindication, rule of law, checks and balances working. But then the budget math kicks in. $150 billion in refunds. Where does that money come from? The debt ceiling is already maxed. Do they cut spending, raise taxes, borrow more? Fiscal crisis on top of legal crisis. Meanwhile, small businesses that sold their refund claims to hedge funds realize they made a terrible mistake. The hedge funds are about to collect millions, while the small businesses got pennies on the dollar. Class action lawsuits probably start. Companies that weren't advised to file protective suits sue their lawyers for malpractice. Didn't you know this was coming? Why didn't you protect our rights? It cascades. Legal chaos, financial chaos, political chaos, and all of it starts within minutes of the opinion posting at 10 a.m. on whatever day the Supreme Court chooses. Could be February 20th, could be March 3rd, could be April 7th, nobody knows. The court doesn't announce in advance, which means every business with a stake in this is on edge, checking news constantly, waiting for the bomb to drop. Here's what's insane. While all this is happening, Trump is already planning his response. If he loses, he's going to impose new tariffs immediately under different legal authorities. Section 232, National Security. Section 301, Unfair Trade. He's going to replace the lost revenue within days. So companies might get refunds on old tariffs while paying new tariffs at the same time. The chaos just continues. Now, let's talk about what this means for the next crisis, because there will be a next crisis. If the Supreme Court sides with Trump, the president is set. Future presidents have carte blanche to use IEPA for trade policy. Imagine President whoever in 2030 they decide climate change is a national emergency. They use IEPA to impose tariffs on imports from countries with high carbon emissions. Legal based on Trump's president, yes. Or imagine a different president decides income inequality is a national emergency. They use PA to impose tariffs on luxury goods from Europe. Legal based on Trump's president, maybe. The floodgates open. Every policy goal becomes an emergency. Every emergency justifies tariffs. Congress becomes irrelevant, or the opposite. If the Supreme Court strikes down Trump's tariffs and says IPA doesn't authorize this, future presidents are constrained, but maybe too constrained. What if China actually does something that requires immediate tariff response, and the president's hands are tied? What if there's a genuine emergency, not a manufactured trade deficit emergency, but a real threat, and the tools available aren't enough? This case creates that tension. How much power should the president have? How much should Congress control? There's no perfect answer. Too much presidential power leads to abuse. Too little leads to paralysis. The Supreme Court has to find the line, and wherever they put it affects every future administration dealing with trade, sanctions, emergencies, economic policy. Think about CO. Imagine if CO happened after this ruling. Would the president have authority to impose emergency economic measures without Congress? Or would Congress have to debate everything while a pandemic raged? The precedent set here ripples through decades of future crises, and business planning becomes impossible. If you're a company trying to decide whether to import goods, build a factory overseas, sign a trade contract, you need to know the rules. But if the rules can change overnight based on whatever the president declares an emergency, you can't plan, you can't invest, you can't grow. Uncertainty kills economic growth. Companies postpone decisions. They wait to see what happens. They hedge instead of committing. And that uncertainty compounds every year. This drags out. Every month, companies wait for the Supreme Court as a month of delayed investment and lost growth. Some economists estimate that trade policy uncertainty since 2018 has cost the U.S. economy hundreds of billions in GDP. Companies that didn't expand because they didn't know what tariffs would apply next year. That's real economic loss. This case either resolves that uncertainty or makes it permanent, depending on how the court rules. And here's the final twist that's going to blow your mind. Even if Trump loses this case, even if $150 billion gets refunded, he's already collected more in tariffs under other authorities. Section 232, steel tariffs. Section 301, China tariffs. The reciprocal tariffs might be illegal, but the other tariffs stay. Your prices stay high. The refund might not even matter. Okay, let's get practical. What do you actually do with this information? First, if you own stock in retail companies, understand your exposure. Companies like Costco, Target, Walmart, they have huge potential refund claims. If the Supreme Court rules in their favor, their stock could pop. But it's a gamble. If the court rules against them or uses the sunburst doctrine, they get nothing and the stock already priced and hope crashes. Do your own research. Look at SEC filings. See which companies have disclosed tariff litigation. Decide if you want that exposure. Second, if you work for a company that imports goods, talk to your finance team. Ask if the company has filed protective suits. Ask if they're registered for the electronic refund system. Ask what the cash flow impact is. Not because you can change anything, but because you need to know if your job is at risk. If the company is bleeding cash, waiting for refunds that might not come, layoffs could follow. Be prepared. Third, diversify your investments. If you're heavily exposed to trade-sensitive sectors, don't put all your money in retailers or importers or manufacturers dependent on global supply chains. Spread the risk. Fourth, build an emergency fund if you don't have one already. 3 to 6 months of expenses, because if this ruling triggers economic volatility, job security drops. Having cash gives you options. Fifth, stay informed. This ruling could drop any day, and when it does, understand what it actually says before reacting. Don't just read headlines, read analysis. Understand if it's full refunds, partial refunds, prospective only, whatever. The details matter and markets overreact to headlines. If you understand what actually happened, you can make better decisions while everyone else panics. Sixth, don't assume prices will fall if refunds happen. Companies will take time to pass savings through. Competition might force it eventually, but plan for higher prices to persist for months, even if tariffs get struck down. Seventh, consider the political implications. If Trump loses this case, he's going to be angry. Policies will change, new tariffs under different authorities. The trade war continues. Factor that into your business and investment decisions. And finally, recognize this is part of a bigger trend. Trade policy is becoming more protectionist. Whether it's Trump or whoever comes next, tariffs and trade restrictions are the new normal. Global supply chains are fragmenting. Costs are rising. Plan for that world, not the low tariff globalization world of the 1990s and 2000s. Let me bring this all together. 10,000 companies filed lawsuits claiming Trump used the wrong law to impose $150 billion in tariffs. 2 federal courts agreed. The Supreme Court heard arguments. They're about to rule. If they strike down the tariffs, the biggest refund in U.S. customs history happens. Small businesses that sold claims for 9 cents on the dollar realize they made a catastrophic mistake. Hedge funds make fortunes. The government faces a budget crisis. Markets swing wildly. If they uphold the tariffs, presidential power expands dramatically. Future presidents can use emergency declarations for almost any policy. Congressional trade authority diminishes. Constitutional structure shifts. Either way, this case reshapes American government and economy for decades, and it's happening right now. February 6th, next week, companies have to register for electronic refunds. February 20th, the court comes back from recess. Sometime between then and June, the opinion drops. No warning, no countdown. Just at 10 a.m., really. And release on opinion day, and the financial world changes instantly. You didn't ask to be part of this. You just bought groceries and electronics and paid higher prices because of tariffs that might have been illegal. But you are part of it. Your wallet, your job, your investments, all exposed to whatever 9 Supreme Court justices decide in the coming weeks. The biggest refund crisis in American history is about to hit. And whether you're ready or not, you're involved. If you want real-time updates the moment the Supreme Court ruling drops, join our WhatsApp channel, Economy Meet History. I'll post analysis immediately before the mainstream media explains it, before your financial advisor calls you. You'll know what it means and what to do. Link in description. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell because when this ruling comes, I'm breaking down every detail, every implication, every opportunity and risk. You need to understand this before it's too late. The Supreme Court is about to trigger financial chaos. 150 billion, 1,000 companies, millions of jobs, your money, and the clock is ticking down to February 6th. This is Economy Meet History. Thanks for watching.